I'm Iris Tao in for Steve Lance tonight. The Supreme Court today temporarily barred the Trump administration from deporting alleged Venezuelan gang members held in a northern Texas facility under the Alien Enemies Act. In a 7-2 decision, the High Court ruled in favor of a case filed by the group of illegal immigrants. The plaintiff argued that they weren't given enough time to legally challenge their deportations. Their case was brought to a lower court earlier this year, but was quickly dismissed. President Trump has been using the Aliens Enemies Act to speed up the removal of criminal illegal immigrants. Many of them are currently detained for alleged involvement in violent gang activities. But going forward, detainees must receive notice and an opportunity to seek relief before deportation. Responding to the verdict, President Trump said on Truth Social, quote, "The result of this decision will let more criminals pour into our country, doing great harm to our cherished American republic." The case has been sent back to the lower court now for further proceedings. And fiscal hawks in the House Budget Committee voted down President Trump's big, beautiful bill. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on the story.
Sadly, I'm a hard no until we get this ironed out. And I think we made progress, but it just takes time.
The House's Budget Committee went on recess right after the vote. Republican leadership will now try to negotiate with both extremes of the GOP conference over the weekend.
There are basically two different factors. There's red states and blue state folks, right? We got more red state folks in our conference, and they have concerns about it. But we have blue state people who have realities they've got to deal with at home, and they need some relief for their constituents. So I'm absolutely confident that we're going to be able to work out a compromise that everybody can live with.
New York Republicans like Congressman Mike Lawler and Nick LaLotta are demanding higher caps for the state and local taxes deduction.
It takes 218 votes to pass the bill. And I've been very clear where I stand on this, and that's not going to change because Marjorie Taylor Greene throws a hissy fit on Twitter.
Well, House Freedom Caucus members like Congressman Chip Roy want to see waste, fraud, and abuse cut from Medicaid.
Someone defend to me that we give 7 times as much money to an able-bodied, often single, often male person than we do the vulnerable population for whom Medicaid was designed. And we allow states to then money launder that, which they do openly and admit it, to fatten their coffers, and we're not going to touch that?
House Republican leadership acknowledged that not everyone in the GOP conference will get 100% of their demands, but insists that the current bill is a fair compromise.
When we negotiated the first half of this two-step process, and that's the budget, the agreement was we make it a deficit-neutral bill. That was their main request. We have exceeded that. We're still moving forward with the timeline. You know, the bill will be on the floor next week.
In between the House Freedom Caucus and the SALT Caucus, there's a Republican conference pushing to pass the president's agenda and the president's tax cuts.
But at the end of the day, we have to find that sweet spot where everybody comes together on the same page and deliver for the president. We're very, very close on this.
It remains to be seen if President Trump will get involved in the negotiations as he did earlier this year during the budget battle. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
The Secret Service reportedly interviewed former FBI Director James Comey in the Washington, D.C. office on Friday about his social media posts. Video aired by CNN showed Comey departing his home for the interview. President Trump says Comey knew what he was doing with the since deleted post from Thursday, which included a photo of seashells forming the numbers 8647. And Comey called the shell arrangement cool. He responded to the backlash in another post saying, quote, "It never occurred to him that the numbers could be interpreted as violent." The number 86 informally means to remove, eliminate, or get rid of something or someone in military and law enforcement terms. Trump said Comey knew what it meant. While DNI Director Tulsi Gabbard called for Comey to be arrested, the Secret Service responded on X saying, quote, "We're aware of the social media post by the former FBI director, and we take rhetoric like this very seriously." In an op-ed in the Washington Post back in January last year, Comey wrote, quote, "We should always worry about political violence, especially when violent rhetoric and behavior are embraced or even celebrated." The president said he would leave it up to Attorney General Pam Bondi to decide what happens next. Trump fired Comey back in 2017 during an investigation of the 2016 election. And President Trump this week wrapping up an eventful 4-day trip to the Middle East, returning to Washington with a string of major investment deals for the U.S. Joining us is Epoch Times senior White House correspondent Amel Akan. She has been following the president throughout this week in the Middle East. And Mel, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So you've been on the ground this whole week following President Trump's Middle East tour to 3 different countries. You were first in Saudi Arabia, then in Qatar, and now in the UAE. So give us a sense of the mood there. What stood out to you the most? How it was received? I'm sure you're so exhausted now. Like, how was the whole trip?
Yes, you're right about that. It was a very stressful trip. We tried to cover 3 countries in 4 days. Even President Trump joked about it. He said that it was a big test for all of us here and during this visit. And he said that it required really a lot of mental and physical energy. And he was right about it. And what I would say was one of the most fascinating things in this trip is the fact that all these nations, all these countries were really well prepared to welcome Trump. They also found his approach towards Middle East useful and important. So that's why they had very traditional, very lavish ceremonies. And I think that to me was very interesting to watch. And it almost felt like they were competing with each other to give the best, to offer the best welcome ceremony for President Trump.
Well, I'm sure you've seen a lot of elaborate ceremonies throughout this trip. And stepping back a little, we know that the Middle East was also President Trump's first stop when he was the president in his first term. That was also his first major foreign trip back then. So how does this trip this time around compare with the last one? How is Trump potentially approaching his foreign policy toward the Middle East different in 2025 versus back in 2017?
Correct. This was a little bit different than the first term, I would say, because he excluded Israel from this trip. He added 2 other stops, the UAE and also Qatar. And I think most fascinating thing in this whole trip was adding Qatar to the itinerary, because Qatar just a few weeks ago said that they wouldn't allow the United States to use the U.S. military base here in Qatar, and they also have been accused of hosting Hamas leaders for years. So that's like a different country compared to how Saudis and the UAE relationship. So I think that was fascinating to see. And you see the leader of Qatar talking about President Trump and how he prayed for him when he had an assassination attempt against him. So it was all fascinating to see. And he also made joke about drill, baby, drill. He said he supported the oil production as well. So I think that was an interesting element and different element when you compare it with the first visit. And I guess that the whole trip was more about making business deals here this time. And that also was important.
A major theme of this trip was deal making. President Trump said he secured more than $1.4 trillion in new investments. So how do you think these deals will shape U.S. relations with these Gulf nations? What implications do they carry beyond potentially economic cooperation?
I think this is very important, and President Trump made it very clear that he would visit countries that make investments in the United States. These countries we need to remember, these countries have enormous funds when you talk about their, sovereign wealth funds. They manage more than $1 trillion assets under management. So they have enormous wealth and are able to invest in the United States, bring more jobs for U.S. manufacturing sector. So I think for Trump, it was a very critical wealth. And he wanted to use that. He used that as an opportunity. And he made it very clear that he wants to appeal to, and he wants to sell and pitch his America First policies to wealth, to the wealthy Gulf investors here.
And during that speech, he also made a big announcement, which is that the U.S. will now lift sanctions on Syria. Tell us the significance of that. How did the audience react to that, and how were different people reacting to it during the trip?
Well, that was one of the most important announcements he made during this trip. This request came from the Saudi leader, the Crown Prince. Wanted to, he during this trip, he asked Trump to lift the sanctions on Syria. And he also had a phone conversation with the Turkish President Erdogan on this topic. I think that was a big win for Saudi Arabia and Turkey. And now you can see that these countries of Syria, I think there will be a regional development, economic development, which could also benefit Americans as well, especially in the construction sector. But a question remains, will Syria uphold human rights? Because there are ongoing issues in Syria against minorities, and so we will have to see.
Well, we'll certainly watch very closely for the next few days and next week then if any progress is made. And Amel, thank you so much for your hard work and great reporting on the ground. We're so glad to have you with the Epoch Times and talking to us with NTD. So really appreciate it and hope to see you soon back at the White House.
Thank you, Iris.
The FBI is leaving its longtime Washington headquarters in the J. Edgar Hoover building. FBI Director Kash Patel says the building is too old and unsafe. Patel says the Bureau will be moving 1,500 agents across the country, adding that every state would get a supplemental supply of agents. The intent, he says, is to inspire Americans to work for the FBI as intel analysis and agents. Patel says this will be the agency's focus over the next 3 to 9 months. The Trump administration has sent mixed messages about the building, from potentially selling it to rebuilding the headquarters. President Trump's 2026 budget proposal includes a roughly $500 million funding cut for the Bureau.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.